Right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mrs. Robinson. I am the librarian at Colony High School. I'm so excited to work with you guys on National History Day. I was introduced to National History Day last year by one of my teachers, Mrs. Corveses, and I was just astounded at the student work that was produced. It was just so amazing to see. This is Miss Morales from Chaffee High School.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ms. Morales, and I am the teacher librarian at Chaffee High School. And we've here at Chaffee been doing National History Day for a few years now. It's been maybe, I think this is our third or fourth year, and I've had a chance to work with the students and with our teachers, and it really has been quite the experience. It seems overwhelming at first, but over the semester, we really get a chance to dive into the work, and it becomes, if you take it a piece at a time, it's actually like a really cool experience. So I'm very excited to now join Ms. Robinson and Ms. Nemechek in this wonderful project. And so let me turn it over to Ms. Nemechek.
Well, hi, I'm Mrs. Nemechek, the librarian at Etiwanda High School. This is our first year doing National History Day. So I am here to learn along with you guys, as well as to help. And I also wanted to just mention, welcome to Annalise, who just popped into our session, our workshop, and just want to let Annalise know that this session is being recorded.
All right. If you see on the bottom of this first slideshow, we do have a bit.ly link. For mine, it's cut off. I don't know if you guys could see it, but it's bit.ly/CJUHSD. NHD1, and that will take you to a copy of this slideshow in case you wanted to follow along at home. It is case sensitive, so just make sure the NHD are all capitalized. All right, let's get started. Go to the next slide. All right, so we want to introduce this topic of debate and diplomacy to you with this video. We saw this video and we thought it was such a great way to really start the conversation. It's just about a minute long, and while you're watching it, I want you to think about what stands out to you, whether it's an image or a quotation, something you see, something you hear, or just something that you react to, and then we're going to share that out afterwards.
I just realized that maybe that my audio wasn't on. Is that what's happening?
I was wondering if it was just my computer.
One second. Okay, well, we had some technical difficulties, those of us that are here in the session at the moment, but those of you who are listening to this as a recording, you'll be able to view this introduction video from the National History Day website that I thought was a really great way to help me reflect on the work, on the prompt, on the theme, because often, and this is one of the quotes that I took away from as I watched the video, is that often when we think about history, we think about the events, like history is full of events, and we think of big events. Maybe we're thinking World War II, or we're thinking even 9/11, right? 9/11 is on my mind because it's coming up soon, the anniversary. And so we're thinking of events, but often, as in any of the cases, we think about these events, but maybe we're not thinking about everything that led up to it, like the what happened before that, the particular event, the conversations that took place, the negotiations that took place, the conflicts, what led up to the war or what prevented a war, right? And words matter, these moments matter. And so that's actually what this theme is about. It's this idea of like how to communicate with each other, how do nations do that? And so debate and diplomacy is, and I loved how the National History Day organization put this. Here's the second video that we recommend. We weren't going to show it to you today, but we recommend it. It's the National History Day theme question and answer session where they're just talking about like breaking down the prompt, because that's a big part of research. You know, we have to understand what we're searching, what we're doing. And so this video I enjoyed, particularly the idea that diplomacy and debate and diplomacy is like a game of chess. So I don't know if any of the students on the chat currently are, you guys play chess, but it's like a give and take. It's all about strategy. How do you win? How do you get to your end goal? Do you sacrifice your players? How far are you willing to go to get victory? And sometimes, you know, we don't get what we want. Sometimes we might fail at our goal. So history is filled with these exchanges and these critical moments that lead to these major events that we understand as these historical events. But this is like what led up to it is how I understand this year's topic or this year's theme.
Yeah, so I like to think of it like almost like dominoes too. Like one thing can lead to another thing, and it could lead to all of these different reactions. And then what's the end result? To quickly break down the topic, we want to define debate and diplomacy. And debate is formal or informal meetings where people argue on opposing sides. So sometimes this is real clear cut and there are two distinct sides. And sometimes it's a little more complex and there are three or more different perspectives on an issue. And debate could be intertwined with diplomacy, or it could exist independently of diplomacy. Diplomacy is a little bit more complex, and I'm going to let Ms. Morales speak on diplomacy.
Yes, so we thought we wouldn't have too much trouble understanding debate, right? A debate, just like Ms. Robinson described. But diplomacy is an art form, and I loved how this particular definition shares that. So the students who are currently on the Zoom, if you guys wanted to, in your chat, just give us a little something about what do you think diplomacy is? Because I've had a couple of conversations with students doing National History Day currently, and they kind of have like a vague understanding of what is diplomacy. So if I think about one particular exchange, I asked a student, what do you think is diplomacy? And she just replied and said, I think it's about relationships. And I said, yes, absolutely. It is about relationships. It is the art of relationship, because relationships are hard. And I think of like my own personal relationships, right? It's some I have good relationships with some people and some not so much. And I have to work at these relationships. And so to the art of building, maintaining relationships, you know, conducting negotiations, having mutual respect for someone else, right? We don't want to be at war with each other. I don't want to be in conflict with people in my life. I build these relationships, and it takes some work. And that work is actually diplomacy. So like if we were to define it like such, that's how I would approach diplomacy, is this art form, this practice, this building, this, you know, working at relationships. Okay.
So yeah, who conducts diplomacy? And Ms. Morales, she really makes this come alive when we talk about it. But this is where you start diving into the stories that make up our history. And this is where you could pull your topics from when you start looking at the people and what happened and when it happened and all of that. But before we dive into that, and before Ms. Morales talks to you about all of that, because I want her to speak on that, we're just going to give you an overarching view. So if we could go to the next slide, in order to give you guys some context when we start talking about the State Department and diplomacy within our government, We're just gonna quickly look at our federal government and how it's organized. We have our three branches: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And we're gonna focus, while diplomacy does occur in all of these areas, we're gonna focus on the executive branch. And if we go to the next slide, our president, who is considered the head diplomat of our nation, he is in charge of a variety of federal agencies. So as you can see, he's in charge of the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense. And we're going to focus mainly on the Department of State. So we could look at the next slide to give you a breakdown of what the Department of State entails. And the Department of State is fascinating because it was actually our first federal agency ever created after the Constitution was ratified. And I think that shows how important the role of the State Department is in leading the US relations with foreign governments, international organizations, and citizens of other countries, and representing our foreign policy while we are abroad. Excuse me. It's a very people-oriented thing, as Ms. Morales mentioned earlier. We could go to the next slide.
If I could interject here, Ms. Robinson, one thing that I get from students as a participant of National History Day, sometimes I've had an opportunity to meet with kids who are deep into their research and they're really stressed out, and it seems like a very overwhelming task. And as a previous history teacher, one of the things that would just break my heart is when students would say that it was just history was hard, it was too complicated, it was too boring. That's the word that I'd hear. Sadly, it would break my heart. But really, sometimes because we're deep into research, or we're deep into a topic, we sometimes forget that we can approach this as a story. And so this story has plots, it has characters, it has events. And so when Ms. Robinson is referring to the Department of State as a people-oriented agency, as one of the first ones that was created, I want you to think back to what I said about the video and how it's about relationships, about words mattering, about not going to war, not having conflict. And so how does a nation do that? As an individual, I could build on my relationships, work on them, but how does the government do this? How does one nation, in particular ours, as Ms. Robinson broke it down, how do we conduct these relationships? And so this agency that she's mentioning, the Department of State, is in charge of that. That's their whole purpose, is to build on these relationships with other nations. So think about that as she described it, being as the first agency being created after we became a nation. That's how important it was for our small little nation at the time to be in relationship with others. And so
perfectly.
If we think about characters, here's a character for you. So Nicole and Elise, if you guys are thinking about who am I going to do this project on, what can I focus on, you could focus on this character, this person. So the head of the US Department of State is the Secretary of State. So this is one person who acts on behalf of the president and whose job is to go out into the world and be the representative and to share our mission, to share our interests, to share what do we want? We as a nation want the world to know, our neighbors to know, he's out there doing that. And it could be a he, it could be a she. We've had women Secretary of States, we've had people of color. So what a great opportunity to branch out and do your paper on this. Your project could be on the Secretaries of State. That could be a possibility for you if you find this interesting. Other people that conduct diplomacy are ambassadors, foreign service officers, civil servants, cultural ambassadors. So since the president is the head of our government, if you will, right? He can't be in places at once. So we have the Secretary of State the Secretary of State can't be at all countries at once. So we send people to different countries. An ambassador, for example, we have an American ambassador in Mexico. We have an American ambassador in Japan. We have American ambassador all over the world. And so same with this idea of characters, right? So if you wanted to focus your project on characters, you could focus on some of these positions. For example, we've had ambassadors who've been kidnapped. We've had ambassadors who've been killed. We've had ambassadors who have been held hostage. There's a lot of drama in history. There's a lot of drama in this relationship building. So back to our own relationships, there's a lot of drama in our own relationships too. So same with nations. And so this is this could be a possibility for you. So if you're thinking about who's conducting it, right? What is diplomacy? Who's conducting it? And where is it conducted? Where do these people work? What happens? How does this take place? Well, first of all, Washington, D.C., right? That's our capital. And if you think about it being the headquarters, we have ambassadors from other countries come visit us, meet with either our Secretary of State or with our presidents or with the president's cabinet or what have you. And so there's an opportunity for a project there as well. So I'm sure you've seen on the news when the president holds state dinners and you have people coming from all over the world and they dress up and their outfits are even like in a museum somewhere. Like you could do a project on the First Lady's dresses that have been worn. What do the dresses say about the relationship with a particular country? Are they wearing like cultural outfits as a sign of respect? You know, what is happening at these state dinners? That could be a possible choice for your topic. Also, these are embassies around the world, that American embassies that we have, consulates, missions, all serving the purpose of relationship building. And you could look at that. There's been a lot of drama taking place at these locations. So if you think about an example, like what must it have been like to have been at the American embassy in 1939, Germany, before World War II started? Like, what was that like? Who was the ambassador? Who was working there? How did they feel like their lives were in danger? What was going on? That is also a possibility that you might be interested in. There's many examples, like at the break of a war, at the end of a war, the United States Embassy in Vietnam, the United States Embassy in Afghanistan. I know it's on the news right now. We're going to talk about that at the end. But all of these are like the plots, right? So back to the story, you have characters, you have things that are happening. This is the location of where is it taking place, that sort of thing.
So to continue talking about how we can narrow our focus, our first column talks about how you can choose a project that focuses on one particular person, such as Benjamin Franklin, who was our nation's first diplomat, or Ebenezer D. Bassett, who was our nation's first African-American chief of mission, or Eugenie Anderson, who was our first female ambassador. Ms. Morales talked about how we could also do it on a Secretary of State or any of the other people who fall underneath. So the ambassadors, the civil servants, people like that. You could also choose to do your project on a historic event. For example, the Iran hostage crisis, where diplomats were held hostage for 444 days back in 1979. All of the historic events listed here have a lot of resources in the Museum of American Diplomacy, which we are going to show you guys later. That's one of the resources we think would really help you out with this project. You could also talk about the signed and formal agreements or treaties that were created throughout history, such as the Camp David Accords, where the US brokered peace between Israel and Egypt. And I'm breezing through this because I see we have about 4 minutes left in our presentation. But you could also focus on a global issue. And we're going to talk a little bit more in the next, in an upcoming slide about how far you would want to go back in history when we're talking about global issues. But one example of a global issue would be thinking about how the US providing financial aid to another country could possibly advance the US's foreign policy goals. And you could also look at diplomatic practice. So, for example, jazz diplomacy is really interesting during a time period when the governments weren't able to successfully communicate. The US sent jazz diplomats to different countries in order to reach the people, or the concept of giving gifts, where you have to choose a gift that represents the US, and the gifts that you receive, how those are reflective of the country that has given you the gift. I think that's a fascinating subject to look at as well.
I like that one too. I thought that one was really, really interesting to think about how, like, what is appropriate? What if you offend someone? What if your gift causes, you know, major conflict? Yeah, what goes into this gift giving decision making? Who's making this decision? You know, all of this, guys, is out in a museum somewhere. Somebody puts it together. Somebody decides what people wear at these state dinners or during visits. But also the one last thing I wanted to give as an example is that we just had the Olympics. And the Olympics is the ultimate diplomacy, right? You have countries who don't get along who are playing sports next to each other, who are competing in a very different way as opposed to competing out like in a battlefield. So that is an excellent example. Those of you who are into sports, you guys can take a look at that. You don't have to focus on the entire Olympics. You can even just focus on one particular sport, which is something that we've done for many, many years, is like sports diplomacy. But so before we're going to wrap it up, because I know that you're going to want to get to school. One commonly asked question that I know I've had in the past as I've worked with some students, and also the National History Day organizations have mentioned this, is so how far do you go for an event to be considered a historical event? One thing that I myself watch the news all the time, and I'm paying attention to what's happening. And so often I have these moments that are like current events that are just of real interest to me. But I wouldn't be able to answer the prompt, which is debate and diplomacy, consequences, successes, or failures. Like I wouldn't be able to know, you know, what consequences of the event that's happening now. Is it a failure? Was it a success? I can't tell, because not enough time has happened for us to analyze what the effects. So the suggestion, or the suggestion is 20 years, 20 to 25 years, a generation or two, just because that gives us an opportunity to think back to everything that's happened. And if you are very much interested in, for example, Afghanistan and what's happening in Afghanistan, so it's on everybody's mind and everybody's, you know, is talking about it, you could look back to what led up to the events happening now. So 9/11, for example, has a connection to Afghanistan. And even before that, the Cold War, Russia's involvement in, or the Soviet Union's involvement rather, in Afghanistan, the United States relationship with that country as well. So you could do that. The other question that we get is that students sometimes just have a really difficult time finding a topic or narrowing down a topic. And so one suggestion is really simply to start what you really like. Like if you really enjoy sports, like I said, do something on sports. You could pretty much fit any topic into the theme. You just might have to massage it a little bit. You might have to just, you know, focus on the angle of debate and diplomacy, which I hope after this presentation you understand it a little bit better. But essentially, just start with what you're interested in. Make this an enjoyable experience, and don't make it a painful experience. We do have a list of resources that we recommend. One and foremost is the National History Day organization itself. Has everything you need, absolutely everything, from videos, from citation resources, from research, from how to find a primary source, how to find a secondary source. They have it all. If you are not spending time on their website, I don't know what you're doing, because they're going to make your lives a lot easier. There is a museum dedicated entirely to diplomacy. Like that's the whole museum is American diplomacy. So the National Museum of American Diplomacy, I recommend as a place to explore, hop on, look at some of their exhibits, and that might, spark some interest, that might help you narrow down your focus. So that's a recommendation. More YouTube, they have National History Day, like a series of videos that we recommend. I'll let you, Ms. Robinson, you want to close it out for us?
Yeah, we would suggest that if you have any of these social media apps, to definitely follow them, because they give tips and advice and video links all the time. So I would make sure that you are connected with them, so you're following what's going on at that given time period. We could go to the next slide, and I just want to talk about how you guys could contact us. So obviously, for any of our campuses, you could walk directly to the library and you could talk to us one-on-one. But you could also reach out to us through email. So the Chafee librarian, Colony, and Etiwanda, just make sure you're contacting the right school librarian. But if you don't, and it's and you contact someone else, we will forward that email for you. And then if we go to the next slide, we just wanted to say thank you and tell you we have 2 upcoming events on September 24th and October 8th, if you can join us. Also, if you have a topic or something that you want us to present on, please feel free to email us, and we could definitely see if that's possible. If you do want a copy of the presentation, make sure you visit that website link at the bottom. And then we wanted to open it up to any questions or comments that you guys might have.
I'm just gonna stop the recording now.
Okay.
And then that way students that are on the presentation could, we can chat very quickly, or those that need to leave. But at least for now, we'll stop the recording, and then let's take the questions if there's some.
Just want to grab any of the links to the resources we mentioned, they're in the chat as well.